Our third speaker is Dr. Reginald Nalugala, who earned his PhD in international development from Oxford, and now teaches on a variety of topics and works in civil society organizations at Tangaza University College in Karen, Nairobi, Kenya, where I was fortunate to visit some years ago. And his talk is entitled "The Rise of Fundamentalism Today, Challenged by Enlightenment for Social Transformation."
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to speak to you about the Hizmet movement and its contribution to fighting fundamentalism in Africa through their Enlightenment programs. This is after interacting with many movement persons who are working for education and different programs of development in Africa. If there was a catastrophe and I took a rocket to escape this earth and I found myself on another planet, and then I was looking around for help, I would find people are very kind-hearted, people who do not look at where you come from, people who are committed to humanity, people who are thinking about the other, not themselves, people who are very generous, people who give selflessly to others. Then I would ask, who are these people who are just like me from my own particular faith? And somebody would say, these are the Hizmet movement people. Mm-hmm. Through this interaction, I've had a very good experience working with the Journalists and Writers Foundation, and thanks to Kelek and Jemri who are here for giving me that opportunity to be part of them. And there we interact on sustainable development goals and how the whole world is looking towards the building of the common goods for all of us. The world belongs to all of us. The other group that I found value with is Harmony Institute in Nairobi, where some of the students in the postgraduate program are Hizmet members and my students. And then I come from a background of social transformation, which is multidisciplinary approach to human development. It means that if we are to improve human value, then human development is very important. But how? So the conference in Chicago 1987 that brought different disciplines, theology, physics, biology, politics, all the disciplines together, they said, we have come to the end of knowledge. What do we do? Then they said, but through research, we can find truth. There are very many truths, depending on the frameworks we build. But for what? For human development. So while looking at this subject, I was particularly enticed by the reflection that each one of us is going through. Here, men and women dedicated to humanity. But how does it contribute to the well-being of Africa? And then I said, Africa is bedeviled with a lot of fundamentalism, military coup after military coup. So what would be the answer? So perhaps the Hizmet movement has the answer, because all the activities they do, they should be able to promote the human value. However, I'm also bringing out lessons that you can have a country that's very rich, very progressive, catching up with the developed world, coming up with many scientific discoveries, influencing economic development everywhere in the world. Then you just need one person, a bit crazy, to destroy all that. So all these lessons from Turkey are good lessons for Africa. Africa, don't go that route. Very good. So when reflecting on this, I think the key question was then, what is this thing called fundamentalism? And it's a very closed way of looking at the world. You close borders, you close yourself in a very small world. You do not want accepting the neighbor, the person next to you. So people tend to be fundamentalists if they use their religion badly. And so through the Hizmet movement, I'm beginning to see that you can have a different narrative, that accepting the neighbor, work with the neighbor, brings synergy for human development. And so the campaign, through the people who are Hizmet members, helps us to look at Africa differently. So fundamentalism, while it is the kind found in Africa is mixed with religion and politics, there's religious fundamentalism, which is found in groups like Boko Haram, ISIS, Al-Shabaab, the Holy Spirit Mobile Forces in northern Uganda, founded by an Acholi prophetess called Alice Auma Lakwena, and many such groups continue to emerge in Africa. Poverty, desperation, lack of livelihood push young people to find the means to survive. Anyone who can fill that gap becomes the hero. Political fundamentalism tends to be driven by sectarian rigidity for political gains by the ruling elite. And so Anton Giddens, a renowned sociologist, argued that fundamentalism has been caused by significant levels of insecurity brought about by globalization. Perhaps I would add, the fear of globalization drives fundamentalism. This is where reforms become a norm, and fundamentalists mixed with the political establishment offers resistance to reforms for a better democracy. Most countries in Africa will avoid reforms in the name of being a sovereign state. While propagating their stance, they deliberately annihilate anyone coming up with reforms. In a world of confusion and uncertainty, faiths with very clear rules and absolute truths have proved very attractive to those in position of power, who resist reform-driven persons, but at the same time, pushing for their own gains. So growing up in Kenya, I came to learn that if you give too much to religion, you can create fundamentalism. But on the other hand, religion has to mix with the science in order to bring about a logical flow of ideas. So the church in Kenya, especially faith-based groups, had to be very careful not to be swallowed by the state, because under the Moi regime in Kenya, we found that religious leaders would be dining with the political leaders, even building churches, building mosques. And so when it came to criticizing the government, they were told, oh, you remember we built for you a church, or you built a mosque, we built you a school, so why are you criticizing us? These are lessons we're beginning to learn from Turkey. So Gifford called this state capture situation a state of neo-patrimonialism in Africa. And so Gifford and others like Ali Mazrui, Walter Yugi, see fundamentalism in Africa manifested in negative popular nationalism. So to be able to fight fundamentalism, that close nature of the world, is education. And these are the programs that we see the Hizmet movement involved in. Is interaction, being open, not closing yourself very narrowly, but allowing different people to be part of you. And so the situation in Africa is kind of desperate, where this military takeover group after group, thinking that the modern messiahs bringing hope, but hidden behind it is poverty, loss of livelihood, and everybody thinking that the only way to get these livelihoods is to fight. And when you fight, then the military takes over. But then we say people are enlightened, don't have to go that way. We have learned that Turkey before 2016 was a very enlightened society with people who are dedicated to development, people who are giving freely, people who are going out of their own world to give life to others. But you just needed one person to use a small excuse and then turn all that into smoke. And so, in my reflections, I begin to see that Fethullah Gulen, as a spiritual leader and an advocate for peace and a promoter of interfaith dialogue, has provided a platform and a philosophy to help us reflect on human values through education, dialogue, social justice, human rights, and allowing people to thrive. So Fethullah is put in the same line with Pope Francis, especially when they're talking about humanity, tolerance, integration. And so the two of them are great spiritual leaders who advocate for peace, promote of interfaith dialogue. And particularly, I'm very much influenced by the thinking of Fethullah, or Hoja Fendi, as we popularly call him, for helping us to reflect on the Hizmet movement, that a people dedicated to service can bring about the necessary social transformation. And so my methodological approach was influenced by the work of Hizmet movement people, from Journalists and Writers Foundation in New York, Harmony Institute in Nairobi, South Africa, the different Hizmet movement projects that promote human value, interacting and sharing with people. So it has become actually a big study where Professor Monena and myself are hoping that we can write about the Hizmet movement in Africa from an African perspective, that two African scholars can reflect on the work done by Hizmet movement in Africa for future generations to learn how to progress, how to be selfless, how to give without necessarily being swallowed by the system. So in part of the findings, I was particularly impressed by this gentleman called Kalkani. Kalkani had come to New York, had even gone to visit Gulen at the retreat center. And then when he came out, he wrote a very nice article that appears on the website of the Hizmet movement. And his impression was that he has found an institute that can promote human value through dialogue, through peace building, through situations of good politics, democracy, reconciliation, etc. And so based on that, Kalkani came to Nairobi and he was speaking to us there. And having worked also with the Mahatma Gandhi Foundation in India, and also being a personal assistant to Prime Minister Modi in India, he was trying to connect his influence of the politics of the world through the interaction of Gandhi and Fethullah. And so he's looking at his movement as liberative, but at the same time as struggling for human rights. And education is that liberative force. So if education is provided in the right way, you are able to bring about the right values. So part of the Hizmet philosophy applied by Kalkani and speaking to us in Nairobi was that tolerance of all faiths and people takes central stage in the philosophy of Gulen. And therefore, if we are to promote human value, then tolerance is key. And so Africa can learn from this. The question of human rights is very, very important. And so when it comes to democracy, where sometimes we say, well, democracy is the people rule, the people are ruling together. But to rule, you need representative. Now, how you pick representatives is also very, very important. Who is representing you can change the course of history. And in this case, could be a political party with the wrong ideology that can bring about wrong values. And so looking at different models used by the Hizmet movement across Africa, this was very important for me because I was able to look at the question of integration through education. And this is coming from the course group in South Africa, Harmony Institute. And they have tried very much to express the importance of integration. The other one is cohesion. Cohesion is very, very important through the activities that has brought about different groups together. So for example, in most churches, there is a very strong understanding of integration. Democracy and tolerance is the other very interesting question that comes out of all these studies. Then we see that democracy requires dialogue, which we're beginning to see with the Harmony Institute in East Africa. So therefore, dialogue and consultation are closely related to social reforms. And if we work together through ethnic groups, different institutions, even people we don't like, we can actually bring about good dialogue. Then the other one is handling unfairness as the path to social justice, very, very strong within the Hizmet movement. And if you look at the work of Fethullah himself, unfairness, there are some Turkish words I need to learn Turkish to be able to pronounce. And so some of the examples that bring about the practical transformation are helping us to see that the Hizmet movement is a movement of people who are interested in humanity, peace building, democracy, and social justice. So as a conclusion, we are reminded that fundamentalism is not just about being closed or living in a society where people don't interact, but can also be a way of narrow thinking, even within our own intellectual discussions, where views and different opinions are thrown aside, and then we conclude that only mine is important. So the Iranian Revolution raised intellectual discussion about authoritarian theocracy, trying to enshrine a certain dogma that distributes or disturb the public space. There are intellectuals who try to follow puritanical discipline to chastise Iran for bringing theology into a political life of citizens. However, what this debate elicited was how humanity ought to define its own course within a democratic space. If a certain faith is to become transformative, then it ought to influence an ontological lifestyle expressed within a certain culture. Some faith orientations and cultures may exhibit characteristics of a weak ethical discipline. Some of the cultural ontology that require transformation hinge around no respect for others who are not part of the orientation cultures. But what we learned from the Hizmet movement, that we can combine religion and science to promote about human value. Winning hearts and minds is very important through education. Thank you.